Before we start this podcast, I want to definitely remind you of a sponsor for Fresh of the Word, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest. In the world of wrestling where there's hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads, don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. So if you'd like to discuss a possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or even Zubaz, then drop them a line at 20by20apparel.com. That's the number 20x, the number 20apparel.com. And also check out their enamel pin line. It's super cool.
Fresh is the word.
Welcome to the Fresh is the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And like always, we have the freshest of guests for you. And the guest for this episode is American scholar, feminist, and author Jane Ward. And we're going to talk about her newest book, The Tragedy of Heterosexuality. With that, we get into a lot of my own journey to finding my own sexuality and my own gender identity, and how fun it is to kind of let loose and be on that, queer spectrum, whatever side of it is, And I was able to actually kind of resolve a few things in my mind during this episode. You'll hear it in this episode. One thing that I'd always say is like, yeah, I'm queer, but I still like women. It made it sound like I was kind of ashamed. I felt like I was saying it in a way where I was like a little ashamed still about identifying as queer. But Jane was like, no, think about it as I'm queer and I'm attracted to women. You make it a positive. And I was like, yo, boom, that's exactly right. Yo, Jane Ward, she's a professor of gender and sexuality studies at the University of California Riverside, where she teaches courses in feminist, queer, and heterosexuality studies. She's had a couple previous books called Not Gay, Sex Between Straight White Men, and that shit's fascinating because I got that book too, and Respectably Queer. So it was a good interview with her. I like doing these interviews with sex educators because I learn a lot and I feel like I got a lot to share with people about my situation, because I feel like, everybody's story is sort of unique and everybody's kind of queer in their own ways. While I'm recording this, the night before, I interviewed erotic audio artist and humiliation, specialist, Dr. Lovejoy, and she was such she was such a joy, a gem to talk to, and that interview will be up in a couple of weeks. But it was like, we talked about what she does, and she is like the femdom. She does all this sort of audio. Everybody has these sort of kinks, and she can get through with just audio. Like she said, like she don't show her her ass and her tits and what everything her voice, her mouth is her pussy. But she was such a joy. Like I heard her on the Two Girls One Mic podcast. I've had Yvette and Alice on the podcast before, and she made me speechless. Look, I'm speechless right now trying to talk about being speechless. She was a joy. She's very fun. See, I can't even talk. I'm like, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, yeah, look for that in a couple weeks. Next week will be my interview with Prika, from the thrash metal band Nervosa. They used to be an all female, all Brazilian thrash metal band, but now they've had a lineup change, and they're more international. The new members of the band are from from Europe, and we talk about all that, about the lineup change, and we talk a lot about the hardships in Brazil, how it is being a woman, or even just a young girl trying to figure out what she wants to do in her life in Brazil. uh, you know, how Parika has been a role model for women who want to get into things that are very male dominated. And it's good. I love Nervosa so much. Their newest album is it's on Napalm Records. It is it's dope. It's heavy. It's awesome, and I love all their albums. So be on the lookout for that. Besides that, I'm gonna very soon. I don't have the date yet. I'm gonna be starting a Twitch TV show. Twitch TV show about. It's gonna be a Twitch show. It's gonna be video, and it's gonna be about Detroit music history. It's gonna be about obscure stuff. I think I'm gonna go with the name Obscurities. And each week I'm gonna pick like 5 records that are from my collection, actual physical records of varying like genres. And these are things that maybe people don't know about in Detroit music history. I keep on buying records too during this pandemic, that I have more and more and more and more stuff. And then so be on the lookout for that. I don't have a time frame on that, but that's going to be the audio for that's going to be on the Renaissance Soul podcast feed. I'm going to include it on there, and I'll probably have the video for that on my Patreon. And I'm gonna start putting videos of stuff that I do on Zoom and whatever, if it comes out cool on my Patreon. I really haven't been doing much on Patreon lately, just been using it as a tip jar. But if you go to patreon.com/fresh is the word, for as little as $1 a month, just $1, one stinking little dollar, but feel free to do more. You can help out with the show, and it definitely helps out, because I keep on buying records. So any tips or anything, if you have records you want to Detroit records that you want to like donate to the cause, just hit me up, yo. Like, I'll take, I'm down to take anything. I'm really looking for old like soul funk 45s, old hardcore punk 45s and albums. I got a lot of hip hop stuff, but there might be stuff that I might not know about. I'm always like finding little weird stuff. And I also like really odd things too. I'm looking for a really oddball, like 7 inches and stuff that came from Detroit or the surrounding areas. It's more of like a Michigan thing, more so. But it's still centered around Detroit. But be on the lookout for that. Of course, I'm still like doing the Renaissance Soul podcast. I just dropped in my interview that I did a while back with jazz legend Wendell Harrison. So go check that out on Renaissance Soul. And I got a few more in the books right now. And everything's kind of cool right now. We're getting a lot of snow here in Michigan. There's a lot of deep freeze and snow everywhere. Positive thoughts to anybody down in Texas. If you can help, they just got hit, and there's so many people that are just they don't got power or heat or anything. The government down there definitely failed them, and looks like they're continuing to fail them. You got the idiot Ted Cruz going on vacation in the middle of all this, man. Fuck that guy. But there's just go online. There's a lot of ways you can help. I know people are struggling down there because they're not used to that weather, and then you got it's really, and then you got fuckers like what's his name, man, Jimmy Jones or whatever, the Jerry Jones. He's the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, man. He's making a killing off the because he owns a power energy company, and he's making a killing off of that right now. One person's struggle is another person's jackpot. But karma's gonna come for these motherfuckers. You know what I'm saying? So, but without further ado, let's get into this interview with Jane Ward and talk about her newest book, The Tragedy of Heterosexuality. And the guest for this episode is Jane Ward. She is a professor of Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of California Riverside, and she's the author of Not Gay, Sex Between Straight White Men, and Respectably Queer, Diversity, Culture in the LGBT Activist Organizations. And her newest book is The Tragedy of Heterosexuality. How you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Just making it through this weird world we are living in right now.
Exactly. That's all we can do.
How you making it through the pandemic?
I was doing okay until the wildfires. I'm in California, and one of the fires was right above our house, on the mountain right above our house. So it just was a lot at once. But thankfully, thank you to the firefighters, it is now out, and a blue sky has returned.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Yeah, that was nuts.
Oh, oh. It got to, I mean, we've had fires here before where we have to stay indoors because it's so smoky, but it's never been so close and so smoky that the smoke was coming into our house, even with windows and doors closed. And so that was when it really started to get kind of claustrophobic.
Oh, did you stay the whole time, or what'd you have to
I
do?
took our 10-year-old. My wife stayed because she needed to stay and take care of the animals. We have chickens and a pig, sort of like a little mini farm here.
Nice.
But I took our 10-year-old and just headed east to Arizona for a few days so we could breathe.
Yeah, it was. That's crazy, man. Woo. So yeah, I'm glad
Yeah,
everything is cleared up in your part. You're safe. It's good to hear.
I know. Now I'm just hoping I had to take a break from the news because it was raising my anxiety level. So I'm kind of like hibernating until November 4th when I hope to wake up to really good news.
I feel you, man. It's like we're. It's just like every day you're like, what am I gonna read today that's gonna just be nuts?
I know. It's an endless flow of bad news. It's really hard to catch a break. And especially if you're a person, I mean, I know this is not our topic for today, but if you're a person who struggles with anxiety like I do, it's interesting because suddenly everybody is kind of vibrating on the same anxious level that I normally vibrate at. And so in that way, it's kind of validating.
Yeah.
But it also is like, oh, I really got to make sure that I take care of myself. And, I'm just not on like watching the news or on social media too much, or it can kind of paralyze me.
What do you kind of do when you get in that sort of when that hits really bad, besides just kind of
Yeah.
separating yourself, like what do you have to do at that moment?
Well, it's hard because I actually find I'm kind of a news junkie, and I find, politics is like my sports. I don't like sports, but I watch a presidential debate like other people watch, the Super Bowl. And so it's hard for me because I want to watch it, but things have gotten so bad that I have to actually pull myself back from something that sort of gives me pleasure, but if I'm not careful, it goes from excitement to anxiety pretty quick. And so,
Right.
like turning off all of the news, even though that makes me sad to do that, I have to do that. I have to walk outside. I meditate. I've been kind of dealing with this for a while. So unfortunately, my partner, she can recognize the early signs of me getting ramped up. And so she'll often be like, okay, you're seeming anxious, time to take care of yourself.
So your career, is based around gender and sexuality studies. You have the, multiple books that kind of go down that line. What got you into, wanting to go into that field, and what kept you continuing like this journey to sort of dive into all these aspects of, gender and sexuality?
Well, I actually got my PhD in sociology, and I did focus on in queer studies, and I did some research when I was in grad school on HIV/AIDS. But what happened was that I got hired into a sociology department, and I was just so grateful to have a job. Honestly, it's so competitive, the academic job market, that when I got a job, I just was like, hallelujah, I got a job.
Right.
But I was not expecting it to be so conservative in my department. And it turned out to be a department that was pretty racist, sexist, homophobic, and it was so toxic that I thought, I'll leave the academy if that's what I have to do. I went on the job market to try to find another job, and I did get another job. And then my university said, we really don't want to lose you to where you think you would be happy. And I said, hell yeah, I didn't even know that was an option. I would like to move. I'd like to move to gender studies. And they said, great, let's make it happen. We want you to be happy here. And I have to say, it was kind of like divorcing an abusive partner and then having like a hot new romance. I just was so happy to be out of that department. And one of the things that happened in, gender studies is an interdisciplinary field. So there are all kinds of people, people who get their degrees in, there are some people with PhDs in feminist studies, but a lot of people from anthropology and political science and sociology and psychology. And so we had, and literature, comparative literature, various humanities disciplines. So it really invites you, like, as long as your work is focused in some way on gender and sexuality, you can be really creative with the methods and the theory that you bring to it, because it is an interdisciplinary field. And so I love being in a gender studies department.
How did you sort of mold your own sort of, theories and practices, once you moved into that field?
Well, I've been working now for over 10 years in a new field that I'd say really just kind of a handful of people are helping to build. I mean, maybe more than that. But and I guess we could call this field like critical straightness studies or critical heterosexuality studies. And I've been inspired by the way that that critical race scholars highlighted for us that to really understand systems of white supremacy and racial injustice, racial hierarchies, we can't just look at what's going on for people of color. We also have to understand whiteness. And so out of that awareness emerges critical whiteness studies.
Yeah.
And similarly, feminist research on men and masculinity. And so I'm queer and I'm a queer scholar, but I'm really interested in straightness, which may, I think, seem strange to some people, but I'm interested in it as a historical category. I want to know when was the concept of heterosexuality first invented and by whom and what was the context. I want to know, how have people, how's people's thinking about heterosexuality changed over time? How are heterosexuality and homosexuality kind of defined in relation to or in opposition to one another? So I teach a course called Critical Approaches to Heterosexuality. And my last book was about some of the complexities of straightness. And now this book is also about straight culture and my observations of it as a lesbian.
Yeah, it's kind of like that thing where people will, doesn't matter what they're doing, like if they want to change something in the world or reinvent themselves, they don't necessarily reinvent themselves. They try to understand what the obstacles out there. And it's kind of like, to change yourself, you have to change the world.
Right, because none of us are actually individual actors who are living in a vacuum. are in many ways all of the choices that are made available to us are kind of scripted.
Yeah.
And if we want to get free, if we want more liberating alternatives, we have to really work to find those.
Yeah, one of the things that, at the beginning of the tragedy of heterosexuality that I liked, it was just like you were just kind of giving a broad overview of what you're about to read in this book, and there was that point where you asked this a couple lesbian couples or a couple queer women, they who had kids, and they were saying how they don't want their children to be gay, so they didn't have to deal with what they had to go through. But then you asked why, why do you think like that way? And they eventually were like, you know what, I do love being queer, and
Right.
I like that story too because, for me personally, I came out as queer last almost a year ago, I guess now.
Oh, congratulations. That's so fresh and new.
Yeah, and it was after years of sort of like having all these questions because I didn't fit into the heteronormative things that I was seeing all over all the times, and nothing. I just was not relating to anything, and so like I started just to kind of go down that rabbit hole. It took a long time to sort of understand it because the discussions just weren't there, like
Right.
in pop culture and everything like that. Um, so it took a while, and I think the critical point in all of this for my journey was when the discussions about gender started becoming more normal, and I
Yeah.
realized that it was my how I resonate as gender wise because I also feel that I'm non-binary, and
Right.
I feel like my the masculine feminine energy is like equally there, and I felt that lent itself to my sexuality more so than anything else. It was like, hey, I feel like it's the gender thing that I've been looking for, and then that like answered everything else. So, and what I liked about that opening with yours is that like once I figured that out, I was like, yo, I like this. I like figuring that I figured myself out for pretty much, and that there's like this sort of new sort of this freedom that in my mind that I can now go with. And but you're still sort of then you look back and you're haunted by all the sort of misogynistic heteronormative things that you've been told all your life that were like you look back and it's just crazy. And then you even still like when you're still dealing with it, like when you do come out and still make that decision, whatever, like you even continue to still frame it in that bigoted way in certain times.
Right. Yeah. I really love what you're saying, and my first thought is just to kind of state the obvious that our gender, our gender identities, gender expression,
Yeah.
and our sexuality are so interconnected. We come to understand our sexuality through gender, and we
Yeah.
come to understand our gender often through our sex practices, sort of tell us something about how we want our gender to be interacted with and how we want to be perceived. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that for, a lot of us as we're figuring out, we're on some kind of queer journey, and sometimes we even get confused. Like we think the primary question is about sexuality, and then we discover it was really about gender,
Yeah,
or vice
exactly.
versa.
Yeah.
And so that, what you said really resonates for me. I think also, um, I love that for many queer people, queerness is kind of, it's almost like a calling. Like you can feel, even maybe before you come out, you can just feel that something about the regular world is just not enough. It's not quite right. It
Right.
doesn't really meet your needs. And there's a great queer scholar named Jose Esteban Munoz who, he's passed, but he wrote so beautifully about this. And he talked about feeling queerness's pull, feeling pulled toward the queer, to gender and sexual non-normativity, not necessarily even like homosexual sex per se, but just like feeling drawn toward the possibility that gender and sexuality could be so much more, or so much more expansive than how it's currently defined. And I think that's such a beautiful definition of queerness.
Yeah, like there's a lot of you make a lot of little nods to this during in the book where it's almost like succumbing to the heterosexual norms that has been put out there is a lot of fucking work.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
be can be very draining, and then then you get into a part where and this is something that definitely was in my mind before, is that I grew up with that whole how to pick up chicks culture, like
Right.
I was growing up in the thick of that, and that's where everybody all my my friends and my family, whatever, like that's where they picked up their things, and it was always oh man, I ain't getting no pussy lately, or she's hot, I wouldn't do, or like whatever, it was all this stuff where it was an entitlement, like like you say in the book a lot. And to me, none of that resonated with me. I was just like, all right. And I tried, and it just came off as, it felt fake to me. It felt kind of sleazy, and I was just like, all right. And then, but at the same time, I didn't learn anything about how to just, you know, how to, deal with like women and other people, how I should be like dealing with, relationships. So I was just like kind of, I don't know. It was just kind of like that thing
Yeah.
where it was like, it's kind of crazy. But like, you know, and you go into it in this book, like the kind of evolution of like the, the dating coaches, the how to pick up chicks, to pick into this sort of life coach, dating coach thing that it would kind of they would reinvent themselves in. Like, do you see that like that culture has progressed in a good way at all?
Well, um, it's complicated, and I try to explain how it's complicated in that part of the book. I
Yeah.
mean, when I started doing an ethnography of pickup artists and seduction coaching, I really expected like, okay, I'm going to hate these men. But once I got in there and started attending these boot camps, I realized that it's really not just straight women who suffer from the culture of heterosexuality. It's also straight men.
Yeah.
And they had, a lot of them got really vulnerable in that space, cried in that space. They basically felt really disempowered around how to meet women, how to talk to women.
Right.
They were often afraid of women. They didn't really feel like they understood what the rules were. Now what they were being taught in many ways just reinforces like some of the worst stereotypes, really like doubles down on the gender binary, number one, but also reinforces a lot of stereotypes about women. But I think what's compelling those men to go to those spaces, to pay $1,500 to $3,000 for a weekend of advice on how to pick up women, is that heterosexuality is broken for a lot of people. And what it looks like for women, for straight women, is different than what it looks like for straight men. Straight women spend a lot of time just kind of complaining together about men, and that's a big part of what I talk about in this book too, that, if heterosexuality is so healthy and functional, and if it truly delivers on this promise of, making people happy or making for an easier life, then why are so many straight women so miserable? And I think the misery that straight women experience, it often kind of reaches a peak, I think, for women as they get older, like in their 40s and 50s, because that's when a lot of women divorce. We know that most divorces are initiated by women, and excuse me, and women often seek out divorce because they've become so disillusioned and frustrated with the inequalities of heterosexual marriage. And we've just got a ton of feminist research that kind of lays that picture out, unfortunately, that even when women work in paid labor force as much as their male partners, even when they make as much money, if not more money than their male partners, they still come home and do way more of the parenting labor, the household labor, the emotional labor. They often, feel really alienated from their husbands who don't know, who are kind of emotionally deficient sometimes, or who act sort of like another child rather than like a truly equal adult life partner. And so for women, a lot of what happens is that they buy these like marriage self-help books, where they go to therapy hoping to save their marriage in some way, to resuscitate it, to deal with all of their resentment. But I think men, the story for them is different. They they repress. We know that men repress a lot of their feelings. Yeah. We know that they're more likely to turn to drugs and alcohol to kind of help medicate the feelings.
Yeah.
So it's tragic on both sides, but different.
Yeah, it's different because from the moment that you're born, men are told be a man, and there's not that space for a man as they're growing up to be vulnerable and share their feelings with another man. If you happen to find that, cool, but it's very rare, and that's why men have all that repressed, and it almost even is even worse for men of color, in the Black and Latino communities, where a lot of that is looked at as a weakness, and it's very troubling. And hopefully we can find men can reinvent themselves, to sort of be open more to all of that.
Yeah, and I hope, one of the arguments that I make at the end of the book is that if for no other reason, it would be
Wait, hold on.
Really, okay.
Sorry about that. All right.
That's okay.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the arguments I make in the book is that if for no other reason, it would really serve men to take care of their mental health, to take care of themselves, but also to think about women, not just their daughters or their wives, but to recognize that if they're really so heterosexual, if they really love women so much, if they're so oriented to women the way they claim to be, then they need to actually care about women as a group. They need to care about what's right, what's best for women. They need to care about women's equality, about women's rights, and that means being a feminist. And when men actually recognize that men can be feminists too, and they have, they kind of get activated around like starting to recognize, the way that masculinity and the way that patriarchy not only is hurting women, but also hurting them, and realizing that they have a stake in, disinvesting in patriarchy, we know that their relationships with women become much healthier. I mean, this like I said, if for no other reason, do it because the sex you have with women is going to be better, because the relationships you have with women is going to be better. They're going to be more sustainable. So I just think, like the health of heterosexuality in many ways is what's on the line.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. One thing I've always thought about, because a part of my journey to, just realizing my identity was that it's probably been about 3 years now, maybe even 4 by now. I started going to therapy, and I learned a lot about myself during that. That changed my life or whatnot. But one of the things that I kind of like, my therapist is a woman, and at a certain point, there was times when she was like, you know what, I would recommend that you go see a male therapist, because there's things that you need to, talk about in regards to that side of things with a male therapist, that I necessarily can't give you the right, tools for. My problem with that was when I started researching like male therapists in my area, they, while all the women came off as being very, when you research them online or whatever, the women came off very nurturing, and all their descriptions and everything was very nurturing. But most of the male therapists, they almost came off as like, these pickup line artists or life coaches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I felt like they I didn't feel like I could trust these guys. I was like, it felt like they were selling something, Do you,
Right.
what's your thoughts about that? Like when, you know, and this kind of builds on what you were talking about in the book, you get these things that are, you know, there to quote unquote help people, but it just still seems like there's this sort of, I guess, misogynistic overtone with it.
Yeah, I mean, my main reaction is that I think it's really too bad that your therapist felt like there were certain things that only, that you could only talk with a man about, or that only men would understand. I mean, that's really, reinforcing this idea that there are like biological or otherwise sort of fixed differences between men and women that just simply cannot be bridged. And we know in the queer community that especially like if we have learned about trans and trans folks and gender fluidity and being non-binary, that gender is a moving target. It's something that
Right.
is a social construction. We can all pick up the tools of gender and use them regardless of our genitals. And so, I'd be really curious, like what she thought she couldn't provide. So I guess that would be my main reaction. It kind of reminds me of when people say like, oh, well, you need to have, like their concern with queer people parenting is that if they have kids, the children, if it's two, gay men, the children won't have a mother and they need to have a mother for certain things, or the children won't have a father and they need to have a father. And the data just simply doesn't support that. The kids, like girls, girl children, have just as good, if not better, outcomes when raised by gay parents, and boys similarly when raised by lesbians, than do children of heterosexual couples.
Yeah.
So we need to question this idea that we have to, you can only get masculinity, or you can only address certain kinds of questions by talking to people with a particular set of genitals.
And I think, where else I'm going with this is that, like, this sort of, kind of this tragedy with heterosexuality, it kind of looms over a lot of different industries, because I feel like, as like the pickup artist sort of industry kind of changed a little bit, as you detailed in the book. You have like I said, you have therapists that kind of feel like they're doing the same thing, and then you have like sort of like the professional hacker, sort of the Gary V's of the world. Not saying Gary V's bad, but the people who kind of imitate him,
Mm-hmm.
like they kind of pick up on sort of like that same vibe, where it's just like what people will be like, LLC Twitter, the people online that will like be like, during this pandemic, at the end of this pandemic you should have a new skill. It's stuff like that, where there's this sort of entitlement, or there's something that kind of mimics that heterosexuality normative thing that kind of seeps into all these other industries. Do you see that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what you're getting at is the intersections of neoliberalism and patriarchy, and the way that there's particular the pressure is on everybody to experience personal transformation and endless personal growth. But I think men experience it in a particular way. Yeah, that you're always supposed to be learning a new set of skills, always supposed to be self-improving. I mean, a lot of this stuff comes out of the private sector. It comes out of like corporate like executive success training programs and those tools have gotten picked up by the psychotherapeutic industry, and there's like now this kind of blend of personal growth, spiritual growth, financial success that gets wrapped in, it's all into one big swirl and then it gets pitched to people on social media. It's hard to escape it. And we know that it actually, rather than having what is perhaps, I hope, the intended effect of improving people's lives, it often actually raises people's stress levels.
Yeah.
Because it sets up a system where you're never good enough.
Right. Like that's the new form of like not being good enough, where like for, decades, you had the, women look a certain way. You have all these beautiful women in these magazines and stuff, where you're getting this new thing where you're getting all this information thrown by you about like you're not good enough in your professional job. Like you should be, start your own business, do it now, whatever. When there's people are, we're like, yo, I'm just dealing with my mental stage now, because mental things like mental health is finally being more out in the open, and there's all these things that are kind of blossoming now, but at the same time you're getting these other things that are like putting pressure on people who are starting to blossom.
Yeah, I mean, this is why one of the things that I love that's been happening in social justice spaces is just so much beautiful attention to healing justice, or healing as an important part, a really critical part of social justice work, that, we have to make sure that our movements, our our social justice movements are truly accessible for other people, but also for ourselves.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to take care of ourselves. We have to be able to assert what our needs are and have those needs respected. We can't be like, with overwork. And so, corporations are never going to care about us that way. They have an investment in getting everything out, squeezing every last drop of your humanity out of you.
Right.
And people who are trying to sell you things similarly, they're not invested in your well-being. But we know that, in our communities and our families and our social justice spaces, there are a lot of people who are talking about this now, who are really thinking about, like, how do we really take care of each other? How do we really, especially at a time when we are looking at like a fascist takeover, a global pandemic, an economic crash, it's too much for everybody. Yeah. And so we really need to be good at taking care of each other.
And see, like, something like the Me Too movement, when it originally first launched, it had that. It had the ideas of, we're gonna, we're here to heal. We're here to have a support. But when it got co-opted by, larger names and everything, a lot of the people that would bring out their stories, they just got kind of thrown to the wolves out there, and they didn't really have the support system that they, needed. So, definitely, I hope that, like, as that goes on, we're going back to creating a support system for these people who need to heal, for whatever reason. Because sometimes when, like, certain things get co-opted and they become a really big deal, you are almost out there to tell your story, but out there alone.
Yeah, and it's so important. We have to always have an intersectional framework so that we can see everything that's happening. And with the Me Too movement, there was a kind of classic white co-optation by, I think, white actors in the entertainment industry of a lot of work that had been done mostly by Black feminist organizers like Tarana Burke, who had first coined the term Me Too. And so that's, just points again to how important it is to first recognize where these ideas come from and really lift up the voices of women of color and women of color organizers in particular, and then not let corporations and media personalities and social influencers, steal movement concepts. Because what happened with Me Too, just like you said, is that not only were people not really supported in a way that would, that could make them safe and whole, but there started to be people selling Me Too T-shirts and Me Too products, and it really became a kind of consumerism that was super creepy.
One of the things that I noticed during my own journey to, finding my identity is, like, when I was looking at, what was going on in, the gay communities, the queer cultures, like, I noticed at times there would be, things that that seemed like they paralleled what was going on in, like, a heteronormative culture. In regards, there's an amount of privilege maybe to, like, white gay men within that community. There's certain things that I saw that were parallel. Do you see that, being a queer woman, that in these communities that there was things that paralleled in this, this damaged heteronormative community that, kind of found itself in the queer community also?
Well, I'm not going to suggest that lesbians don't have problems. We do.
Yeah.
Or that there, aren't hierarchies within queer women's spaces. There are. But I think there's some really important differences between how, between gay male subculture and then queer women's subculture that make gay men especially susceptible to some of that, like assimilationism and hierarchy. And, one of the differences is that many queer women understand their sexuality as having a political component that's not just about being gay, but is also about being a feminist. And a lot of queer women come out sort of through feminist politics, maybe in college. A lot of queer women are first introduced to queer ideas in political organizing work. A lot of queer women are political radicals. So, if you look at Black Lives Matter, for instance, it's a queer woman-led organization. And we see that at the national level, but here in LA, you also see it at the local chapter, that it's just like straight up queer.
Right.
So, and it's mostly women and non-binary people, not so much gay men. So I think we need to interrogate, like, why gay male subculture is less politicized. And, I could speculate about that, but I do think there's more that we need to know to understand that. There's a lot of toxic emphasis in gay male culture because, again, it doesn't have a feminist check on it, because most gay men, aren't thinking, oh, well, if I'm gay, I have to be a feminist. So some of that toxic stuff is about, like, there's sort of a youth obsession, a beauty obsession, a money obsession that runs through gay male culture that I think is really unfortunate.
Sorry about that. But yeah, no, that's definitely, something that I see. And, one thing, and another thing that I always caught myself doing, like, once I came out, was that whenever I would talk about like my sexuality, I'd be like, yeah, I'm queer, but I still prefer women mostly. And I don't know why I say that. I feel like I'm like watering it down or anything, like I feel like I'm still putting it through like a bigoted lens. Is that something that a lot of people go through?
Well, I think it's really great to examine that, to reflect on what is going on and your reasons for saying that. But I also think that we want people to know who we're attracted to. There's nothing wrong with saying, like, if you're queer or you identify as pan or you identify as bi, saying, and, let me also tell you the particular kind of people that I tend to be attracted to. I mean, for some people, their attraction, is to, like I'm a dyke, but I almost exclusively in my dating history have been attracted to butches, genderqueer people. I've dated a couple of trans men. So I'm not one of those lesbians who is attracted to femininity. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's perfectly fine for me to just say that, and that we should all be able to say, what our desire is. But maybe the question might be like, why are you saying I'm queer but instead of I'm queer and? I'm queer and I'm mostly attracted to women.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. That's because I always felt weird about saying it. And I guess it's just like that one word, kind of, changes the whole feel of it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what, and that was like a crazy thing that, just going through all of this, that was actually really exciting is like you like finding all these different things that are on the spectrum of everything, and how everything's sort of like these waves, and they go up and down, and there's all it's all a very exciting thing. And then when you like, you know after the whole gender identity thing, the thing that I really got excited for in learning was, what is gender expression, how you going to express it,
Right.
and I feel like that's a very exciting thing that I don't. I think in a heteronormative culture, people don't understand enough. Like I was at my friend's shop. He has his own clothing line. He's been around for 21 years here in Detroit. It's streetwear in Detroit. Mostly black community. Is his clientele or whatever. And we were talking back and forth about about fashion and everything. And he was talking about like how some people will come in and be like, yo, and they would like something, but they'd be apprehensive about buying it because their friends were like, wearing a certain brand or label, whatever. And he was just like, that doesn't really matter. Just check it out. Like my
Right.
stuff is quality. Just feel it. It's quality. And he was telling me how like I just want people to be able to express themselves through fashion, whether it's my clothes or not. And I felt like that was a thing that like I really got recently. And I even got that before I came out, where I was just like, okay, your expression of yourself is a very powerful thing, and it's very artistic, very spiritual. And do you think that's something that like in the heteronormative community that they just don't understand properly?
Well, I mean, I think it is really scripted. So it's not, obviously straight people play with fashion, but the thing is that there are really rigid rules about what fashion means for women and what fashion means for men. And
Yeah.
there are really rigid rules about what, or so like a very narrow set of possibilities for what straight men apparently are going to think is attractive um, on a woman's body or even about a woman's body itself. And so, I mean, I loved how often you said the word exciting, and that really comes out in the book. That there's a whole chapter of the book in which I asked queer people to talk about what do they think of straight culture, like what have been their experiences of straight culture. And one of the most common things that people said as they were like trying to describe what straight culture is or what it feels like to them as a queer person is that it is so boring. Many people just said, like, when I think about straight people, I just think about how bored they make me.
Right.
And I think, that's because there is so much more creativity and freedom when you're not worried about like, oh, if I do this, if I say this, if I walk this way, if I talk this way, if I wear this clothing, is somebody going to think I'm a fag? Is somebody not going to find me attractive? Just
Right.
it's just it's just so restrictive.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And that was, that's something that I felt more free about once I came out, was that, oh, I can like, I don't have those insecurities anymore. And if someone says anything, I'm like, you didn't hear I'm queer, man.
Yeah, right.
I'm non-binary,
Right.
man. I'm
Whatever
queer.
you're thinking, it's true.
It's true. It's true. All right. So what? you know,
Mhm.
as we wind down things here, you got this new book out, with Tragedy of Heterosexuality. What's next with you? What are you working on these days? What's the future behold for you?
Thank you for asking that. Well, it's an interesting time to be a researcher because we're all supposed to be quarantined, right? But
Right.
before before COVID, I had started a research project that was about Hollywood sex scenes and how the Me Too movement is really changing the way that those are choreographed and filmed and negotiated in actors' contracts. And
Yeah.
so I was really excited to be working on that project. I was, talking to a lot of people who are on set, trying to make sure that actors are safe and comfortable out there, filming a sex scene. And one of the things that I was finding in that project is that, the television that we watch, I mean, not like, on just like regular network television, but on cable now with like HBO and all that, there's just so many shows with like hardcore sex scenes or explicit sex scenes that we often don't think about what is the experience like for those actors, especially those women, to do this scene. And we definitely don't think of it as sex work, right? Because we think, this is TV.
Yeah.
But what I found is that a lot of these women, including like some pretty well-known actors, had been sexually harassed, sexually assaulted on set, given no advance information about how the scene was going to go. That it was really so unregulated that it was a really scary experience for many, many women actors to film a sex scene because there were so many abuses happening as they were being filmed. So hopefully I'm going to get back to that project so that I can get that out there in the world.
And a lot of what you just said is another part of my journey really was, learning about sex work and the porn industry. And a lot of that actually helped me out with, finding my identity. And even a podcast that I was, listening to today, it's called Two Girls, One Mic. It's a porn cast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, and they had Sarah J on there. And the funny thing is, she said many things that you just said, how like there was just so many things that were unregulated to where, down to the, what the videos are being tagged, the CEO of stuff online, girls, showing up to shoots and not knowing what was about to going on, what they were supposed to do, all that sort of stuff that, in her company, like she definitely, has, reinvented for herself just to make sure that, every, women have more power to know what's going on, how they're going to be represented in the, the films and everything like that. So, it's definitely, that's definitely not surprising that, all that stuff is going on, that, there is that, the harassment and just like a lot of the unknown going on with those the women in Hollywood.
Right. Yeah. I mean, was one of the major takeaways for me is that whenever you have a situation in which there is not a negotiation in advance about what's going to happen, it's sort of just like left like, well, let's just like get into character and see how it flows, or, we'll just like play around with it or whatever. That is just a bad deal for women, because it's in that kind of setup where women end up getting assaulted and harassed.
Yeah, it's crazy. And just kind of, close things out, with all your books, especially with the new book, what do you hope that the readers get out of your research?
That's such a good question. I mean, I guess overall, my hope would be that readers really get it that being queer is such a beautiful and liberating experience. I think, unfortunately, one of the things that's come out of the whole born this way, approach to thinking about sexuality is that people have taken from that, like, well, gay people are gay because they were born that way. They can't help it. If they could help it, maybe they would have just been straight, And many people seem to think that being straight, like I said, is makes for an easier life. But I actually think I would be so sad if I had to be straight. I'm so happy being queer. I love it so much. It brings so much joy to my life. And so I would just love for people, especially young people, to see that.
Right. I wish I could have, come to this conclusion a long time ago, but like for what I was experiencing, what I was feeling, like that information, those discussions just weren't out there. So it was just like an unknown thing, but now that like I understand myself more, like it felt like a superpower now that I can like,
and
I can tap into all these different things in my being. I can tap into like my masculine side, but then I can tap into my feminine side.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean, I want to be really clear, like it doesn't mean that homophobia, transphobia, that those things don't exist, that violence against queer people doesn't exist. It does, and it's horrific.
Yeah.
But the point is that that's about straight people. It's about the violence of straight people. It's not about the queerness. Being queer, the queerness brings joy to people's life. That's the good part. And so, one of the things I think we see is kind of a take-home message of the book is that, like, straight people make queer people miserable, and they also make themselves miserable. So we really need to help them out.
Right. And like that whole sort of, they're just born that way automatically, puts queer people like as a victim.
Right. Exactly.
And it's not true. So it's been good talking with you. Love the research that you've been doing. Where can people go online to get more information about you and about the new book and your previous books?
So you can find me at janewardphd.com, and the book is available. It's, of course, on Amazon, but it's at your local bookstore, or you could get it from NYU Press.
Thank you for listening to the Fresh is the Word podcast, hosted and produced by myself, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. Empowered by Anchor at anchor.fm/Fresh is the Word. Fresh is the Word theme music provided by Steve O. You can find more of his productions at iamsteveo.bandcamp.com, and that's EYEAMSTEVEO.bandcamp.com. Fresh is the Word is available on all major streaming platforms. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. If you want to support Fresh is the Word, please consider pledging via Patreon at patreon.com/Fresh is the Word. Follow Fresh is the Word on social media on Twitter at Fresh is the Pod, on Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and join the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Fresh is the Word. For more information about Fresh is the Word and our other podcasts, Breaking Records and Renaissance Soul, and a collection of pop culture articles and reviews, please visit freshesthepodcast.com. Thank you for listening and your support. Goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.